Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our session. My name is Dr. Erin Smith. I am an assistant professor of mathematics education in the College of Education at UNLV. And with me is Dr. Alex Smith.
Hi, I am Dr. Alex Smith. I'm an assistant professor of special education in the Department of Early Childhood, Multilingual, and Special Education here at UNLV.
So I want to thank you first by joining us on this Monday during lunchtime. Our scholarship and practice is called Mathematics Writing, the What, Why, and How. And this is really a collective effort between Dr. Smith, myself, and Dr. Benachia. And we've been working on this project for about 2 years now within this kind of more focused context. But Alex and I have been working in the realm of mathematics writing since COVID, actually, so since 2020. Before we get started, I want to give us a couple of minutes. I just have a problem for you on this first slide and some students' mathematical writing. No, go back one slide. So on this problem here, we have a problem about Alejandro. So Alejandro keeps his soccer trophies on display in his bookshelf. Alejandro has 4 rows of trophies and each row has 5 trophies. Sophie also has a soccer trophy collection and her display shows 5 rows. Each row has 5 trophies. Explain who has more trophies, Alejandro or Sophie. And so when we think about kind of math writing, to get us really kind of think in our brains in a similar space, we think about kind of word problems and then writing some kind of written explanation. That's typically what comes to the forefront of people's minds when they think about mathematics writing. And so we have for you just an example of a student's response to this question. So you can kind of see we've got the student wrote 4 rows times 5 in each, and there's some computation there. 20 is less than 25 in that inequality. 5 rows times 5 in each. And then this final sentence, Sophie has more because 20 is less than 25. So as we progress through this session today, we're going to be thinking about like, what does it mean, one, to write in mathematics and what does that look like? And then how do we make sense of students writing in a productive way? Also from like thinking about improving students' mathematical writing, but also how do we support teachers to improve students' mathematical writing and even improving teachers' own mathematical writing. So some of you might think, yes, this is a great mathematical writing. Others might be like, I feel like it's missing something. So those are some of the kinds of things that we've been thinking a lot about and that we're going to kind of share with you today. But before we dive deep, I have one more comment. I do want to share that some of the work that we're going to share with you today is sponsored or was funded by the College of Education here at UNLV and the National Institute of the Advancement of Education. You can go to the next slide. So we're going to first do some math. Since this is about mathematics writing, we would be remiss to do anything that we had to do some math. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to solve this problem. And you can just get like a scratch piece of paper. You're not turning it in. You're not sharing it with anybody. This is for you to refer back to. So only you are going to see this, but it is important for you to take the time to go through this exercise because when we get back later to this, you're going to want something to look at. So I'll give you 3 minutes to solve this problem about Francisco. Francisco bought 12 packages of candy bars to give out at Halloween. Each package contains 8 bars. Francisco says he has a total of 85 candy bars. Is his answer reasonable? Why or why not? So 3 minutes. Okay, I am going to ask you to pause. I noticed some of you are already taking advantage of the chat, so please, we encourage you to do that as we go through, and we will try to monitor that. If you have some specific questions as we progress, you can put those in the Q&A, or if it's more comfortable for you, you can put them in the chat. There's also a raise hand function that feel free to use that as well. We do have time at the end of the session for some question and answer. I love all the comments though in the chat about thinking about what does it mean to be reasonable. and whether or not the context itself is relevant, or if there are some other factors that might need to be considered. So I love that you're raising those questions. So as we progress, we are going to shift gears. So I want you to hang on to that about Francisco so that you can reference back to it. And I want to take a couple of minutes to kind of introduce who we are, what our backgrounds are very briefly, and then we have a poll for us. So my name is Dr. Erin Smith. I'm an assistant professor of math education with a specific focus on elementary education here at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas. I'm a former math and English as a foreign language teacher. And I've been a teacher educator now for 7 years now. And then Alex, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, and so I've been a teacher educator as well for about 7 years, somewhere in that ballpark. Special education is my background. My research really revolves around progress monitoring and formative assessment, specifically in writing, and also writing interventions for students who are struggling with writing. So I think as we talk about our team, you can kind of see where we have math education, special education, and do we want to go ahead and kind of discuss Dr. Bengochea as well? So Dr. Bengochea is also in the EMS department with me, but his area of specialization is multilingual learners, especially translanguaging. And so as the third member of this team, he's bringing in that other perspective. So it's really nice collaboration where we're thinking about a diverse array of strategies and students in the classrooms that you all will be teaching. And hopefully that is helping us to develop an intervention that takes all those things into consideration. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I think we're going to take a second on the next slide to have you all kind of briefly, through a poll, describe yourselves to us. Yep, and I think take 1 minute. You should see a poll on your screen now with, I believe, 4 questions. It's kind of multiple choice. And we'll give you just a minute to kind of fill that out real quickly, and then we'll kind of take a look at the results. All right, Erin, do you think that's a good time for everybody?
Yeah, can we see the results? Yeah, Bach. I think everybody should be able to see the results. We have some teachers, an instructional coach, administrator, faculty, other education personnel, some outside education. So a nice mix. With more of a focus on middle, secondary, and university. And number 3, writing in math is more than writing a complete second sentence. Yes, absolutely. But oftentimes we think that it is just writing in a complete sentence. That is a misconception that I personally tackle a lot with pre-service teachers and thinking through what that looks like. And then it looks like we have a mix about people who, whether or not they like or don't like writing in mathematics or writing about mathematical topics. So what is mathematical writing? Because that is kind of a broad term. So we have some examples here of what some mathematical writing can look like. So we've got, the majority of it is would often think of story problems. So we've got Padres made a discovery. He claims that all squares are rectangles. Do you agree or disagree? Explaining why. So thinking about categorization and properties of shapes. We have this one in the middle about describing a situation involving money and thinking about a specific context, like in reality that might apply. We have another thing about making sense of a graphic, a pictorial graph over here on the left about muffins. On the right with Mr. Pack, there's different representations or fractions, and this problem asks students to make sense of these different representations and then to determine which one is correct or incorrect and how you would help the particular student. And then we also have this rundown here that you already did about Francisco. So when we think about mathematical writing, it can encompass all of these things and much, much more. So sometimes it's related to mathematics. Sometimes it's related to social emotional learning through reflections. But our focus really is looking at a particular kind of mathematical writing. And so if we go to the next slide, we have a definition for you. So in the work that we do together, we define mathematical writing as an activity in which students write about math concepts and procedures. So they are writing about mathematics, and they're doing so to reason and communicate mathematically. So if a student is writing a reflection or they're writing a report about a mathematician, that's not the kind of mathematical writing that we are focusing on in our research. That's not to say that that is not other kinds of mathematical writing that's not important. That's just not the focus of our work. We also focus specifically, can you go back one slide? In thinking about mathematical writing outside of the genre of proof. So oftentimes in mathematics, we will think about mathematical writing as writing a proof. There is a robust body of literature about mathematical proof. And we are actually thinking about like mathematical writing outside of proof. So thinking about explanations and justifications. Okay, you can go. So why is math writing important? We actually get this question a lot. Like, why should I even write in mathematics? And there's a lot of research to support why writing in math is really great, actually. So it provides insight into students' understanding about math. So you can get greater insight into what they understand than just maybe their written work about different algorithms or their drawings or the representations that they're using. Writing can allow students to dive deeper into mathematics. It can support students to think about approaching math in a lot of different ways, particularly with problems related to like analyzing another person's thinking, like the Francisco problem, or the one that I just showed you 2 slides ago with the different fraction models. And then lastly, it can provide students with a way to learn about their own math thinking. So fostering that meta awareness and metacognition. So in addition to these benefits, kind of on the cognitive side, if you want to go to the next slide, math writing is also important because it is assessed. So roughly half of the states in the US ask students to write mathematically to demonstrate competencies. So you can see here in the green states, and I would actually argue that this map probably needs a little bit more updating, because I know there are states that are not green colored that do require this of students. So for example, I know for Mississippi, that they require students to write mathematically on high stakes assessments to demonstrate their competencies. We also know that how much teachers know about a topic can impact student outcomes. So how much teachers know about mathematical writing and what constitutes good mathematical writing can impact what students produce. And then Powell et al. Conducted a survey in 2021, where they surveyed a national pool of teachers, K-12, and asked them about mathematical writing. And that teachers said math writing was important. The majority of teachers said it was important, yet less than half of them actually regularly provided instruction for students about math writing. So if we think about something that's very important, we also need to support our students in creating mathematical writing and being clear about what we mean by mathematical writing. So another way that we like to think about mathematical writing in particular is we think about it with like these 2 frames, one as an instructional tool and one as an assessment tool. So we know as educators that instruction and assessment go hand in hand, and we're going to come back to this idea across our session. But in our work, we think about mathematical writing as an instructional tool that can promote students' procedural and strategic fluency, their conceptual understanding, and metacognition. And then as an assessment tool, it creates this permanent data point and a record, and it can inform our instructional decisions. So as we progress through this session, we're going to be thinking about it both as instruction and assessment. So I mentioned before that there's a lot of different kinds of mathematical writing. And in 2015, there was an elementary mathematical task force that got together of school and university experts, and they convened with the goal of identifying what is mathematical writing and what's its purposes. So prior to this, we really, as a field of mathematics education, have not reached a consensus beyond, I would say proof is an exception. There's a robust body of literature that kind of spells out what constitutes proof, although they might have some varying disagreements. I would say it's fairly well bounded. Outside of that, mathematical writing has been kind of like a Wild West in a sense, that people are kind of deciding what it is. They're making up their own ideas about what are the features and what constitutes high quality mathematical writing. So in 2015, this group of experts got together and they decided that they wanted to determine what kinds of different genres there were, particularly related to elementary mathematical writing, but many of the work that they did translates up to middle and secondary. And then, of course, teacher education as we prepare and support future teachers across grade levels. So through their work, they identified that there were 4 distinct genres of mathematical writing. So we have exploratory. So this is when a person is making sense of a problem, situation, or their own ideas. There is informative or explanatory, to describe or to explain. This is the one that we often kind of think about, writing explanations. There's argumentative, so they're constructing an argument, they're critiquing an argument. And then the last one is mathematically creative. So they're documenting their original ideas, problem solutions, fluency, conveying their fluency and flexibility in thinking, and elaborating on their ideas. I want to reiterate again, proof kind of doesn't fall into these. So they started with elementary and are expanding out and thinking about how this work would apply. So what we wanted you to take away from this is that, one, math has different genres, just like other writing fields. Students need opportunities to engage with each of these genres. We don't just want to focus on one of them or have all of students' experiences or the majority of students' experiences be in one of the genres, that they do need to have experience with all of them. And that across the genres, they can have different instructional purposes. So we might use them for different learning opportunities or different teaching opportunities. So in our work specifically, we focus on the informative and explanatory genre.
Yeah, I did want to jump in just to make one comment. So we're going to be focusing on the informative and explanatory, but I'd also like to note that one thing that we're really trying to encourage teachers to build up to is more of the argumentative genre, especially. So once they build that foundation in informative and explanatory genre, really moving into constructing an argument or a critique of an argument. In the argumentative genre, when students are asked to write those kinds of responses, they have a tendency to, one, generate more text, and two, that really gets them to think about strategies and efficiency and what strategy may be more efficient than another. So you can really get into teasing apart some of this mathematical thinking and content knowledge. Okay, yeah. I'll go to the next slide now.
Great, thanks for that. So I would also add to that, we have chosen to focus on informative and explanatory for a couple of different reasons. This is not to say the other genres are not important or areas that we don't want to also focus on, but we have chosen to focus on informative and explanatory for a couple of different reasons. So one, as I mentioned before, there is not a consensus still today about what constitutes a high quality written mathematical explanation. So in our work with pre-service teachers and with teachers, we found that we all have different ideas about what would be a high quality written explanation, and trying to tease apart what those facets are is something that we are working towards. In addition to this idea that there is not a consensus, there is also little to no guidance in curriculum that can support teachers or students in writing mathematical explanations. So I think in terms of a curriculum standpoint, there's a lot of area for growth in terms of thinking about supporting students and teachers with their mathematical explanations. So informative and explanatory mathematical writing in particular is the most common type of mathematical writing found in curriculum and on high stakes assessments. And so because of this frequency of this particular kind of mathematical writing, we have this situation where teachers are determining by themselves in their grade level teams what counts as high quality mathematical writing. And so as a consequence of that, students may experience lots of different levels of quality across their K-12 experience. In addition to that, we find that what is foregrounded in instruction and assessment can vary based on what teachers emphasize as aspects of high quality mathematical writing. So for instance, some teachers might foreground the mathematical content and then not support students with actually the writing organization or the planning of their mathematical writing. Or you might have instances where teachers might focus their attention on spelling and grammar at the cost of the mathematics. And maybe some of the instances of that is like the mathematical content knowledge is still developing in the teachers, or they're just not sure how to respond to the students' mathematical writing. And so the work that we do is really trying to, one, identify what is this consensus about what counts as high quality mathematical writing, and then how can we support students and teachers to communicate that to others and to students so that they can be successful, both within their curriculum experiences and within high stakes assessment.
And I think I will kind of take over at this point and talk a little bit more about assessment and instruction. And then Dr. Smith, I think give me a heads up if I start getting long-winded or running towards the end, because I want to make sure we protect time for you all to ask questions. And then again, as I go, please, like if something pops up in your head, you can raise your hand or you can put it in the chat. I appreciate all of that interaction. As we move into this part, I encourage you to make sure you have your written response to the candy bar question earlier. Apparently, everybody is hungry for lunch, thinking about eating. And also think about the students' math writing on the very first slide, where you saw some calculations and then one sentence. And think about how you would evaluate and what your next steps would be instruction-wise from that perspective. So in terms of assessment and instruction, they work hand in hand. We often talk about them as separate things, but I really think that they're together are good instruction. Assessment should be a part of instruction, and instruction should include good assessment. I'm going to start with math writing assessment, primarily because of what Dr. Smith was just talking about. What do we mean by high quality math writing? And so if we put together our assessment first, that helps us really define and think about what it is we are looking for when we're asking students to compose math writing. And by putting in the assessment, we can then think about where our students are, where they need to go, and what we need to focus on to get them there. So again, you can see these bullet points here where we talk about regularly assessed. And when I say regularly assessed, I mean at least once a week. If you're asking students to write once a week, you should be doing some form of assessment once a week, especially within writing, because within that writing process, we know that informative assessment that provides constructive feedback is really, really important within writing class, but also if we're asking students to write in science or social studies or mathematics, giving them that feedback so they know how to revise and how to improve. And more importantly, teaching them how to self-evaluate and think about how they can improve their own writing or evaluate their peers' writing, and really promoting writing as a process. And that assessment piece has to be a part of it to have that process there. In working with several colleagues in the field, we've kind of landed on rubrics seem to be the most effective assessment form for math writing. It's very common in writing in general. And then I don't know, Dr. Smith, is use of rubrics super common within the mathematics classroom?
I like performance assessments. I would say yes, but then many teachers might, just score for accuracy or for evidence, like use a kind of coding scheme as opposed to a rubric.
Okay. Okay, so and it's like I know that a couple of times teachers have been like, new rubric has maybe been new, especially if you're mathematics content uh, teacher. But the main reason, again, we brought it in is because it's very common in writing. Um, but when you're putting these rubrics together, it's important that you're including all of these key components of what you consider to be high quality math writing, and that you design your rubric in a way that allows for growth to show for students. So it's not a you did or you didn't, but we can see that there's a progression being made that supports their self-evaluation and thinking about their own writing and revision. But it also supports us in instruction in terms of, are we seeing the growth towards that model that we're trying to get them towards? And again, kind of like that last piece there, really important within the writing process.
I would also add to that in thinking about
Mhm.
from an instructional standpoint, just how do you, like, if you didn't already use a rubric or you wanted to generate your own, like, how would you identify what are those key features? And sometimes that can be an instructional process as a mathematics teacher to just identify what should be in it and what should it
Mhm.
look like and how could I identify that for students.
Yeah, and I think these are good exercises if you have a PLC, grade level team to think about that. Um, you can utilize some of these other rubrics or think about if there's something specific within your curriculum that you want to feature within your rubrics. I also see it in the chat where the definition of good or high quality math writing is you can follow the arguments being made. And that allows the teachers to then understand where mistakes may occur. So thinking about that organization piece, which I'm glad you pointed that out because I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about that organizational piece. In terms of math writing assessment, there is no consistent assessment being used across schools. For those of y'all who have taken time to look at some of the standardized assessment rubrics like SBAC, they have a tendency to be very basic. So they're not really explicating all the different important things. Because there's not a lot of assessment pieces out there, what we're showing you now is kind of what's out there at the moment. So the rubric on your left, on the left of the screen by Namkung et al. In 2020, of the rubrics we're going to show you, this is the only one that has a research base behind it. So there is research documenting reliability, some criterion validity, and things of that nature. So this is one of the few that has a research base behind it. And again, just you can see the dimensions over here on the left. You have math content, math vocabulary, writing organization, grammar, clarity, and precision. And then you can see the scale of 1 being beginning and 5 at that mastery level. So the 5-point scale kind of will demonstrate growth across time. Now, on the right, you see a rubric developed by Price et al. And Dr. Smith and I were a part of that team. This rubric is a reduced version of the Namkung et al. Rubric. So we kind of condensed some of those dimensions, keeping the 3 key ones of content, vocabulary, and organization in place. But we found with writing grammar, a lot of times, especially with older students, they should be at the mastery level with the grammar. And we also found that when working with especially pre-service teachers, if spelling and grammar was a concern, that seemed to be the majority of the instructional responses. Whereas since it's a mathematics classroom, we wanted them to also weigh that in consideration with the mathematics content. So we feel like writing grammar is more of a, is the grammar good enough to where it's not hindering your interpretation of the student's thinking? And if it is, then it's not necessarily something you focus on within the mathematics classroom, but it could be notes you take into ELA instruction or you pass on to the ELA teacher as something to work on there. And then we also found that with clarity and precision, it makes a lot of sense. But when we started looking at how it was scored and the different scoring, there was just a lot of if a student was struggling with organization, they were struggling with clarity and precision, and vice versa. And so it seemed to be kind of overscoring this one dimension of organization. So we removed writing, grammar, and clarity and precision because we felt like clarity and precision was captured within writing organization. And we added in this dimension of math writing conventions. And so that would include things like using mathematic symbols and representations accurately within your math writing, and also thinking of math writing could include, we try to couple in the representations with it as well. So that is an aspect of math writing that you will see. So take a look at these two rubrics and you can kind of see the consistencies here. One thing I want to point out with these two rubrics is we consider these to be global math writing rubrics. So you could use these in elementary, you could use these in high school. We used them with pre-service teachers in college as well. So we feel like they capture, especially the one by Price et al., even though we kind of helped develop it, but still, we feel like it really captures the gist of what we're looking for in terms of high quality math writing. Now, as I go to the next slide, I'm going to show you a different rubric, and I'm going to give you like a minute to look at them and think about how, especially the one on the left is a little different. If I can get to the right slide. So again, you see the Price et al. Rubric on the right. And then on the left, you see another rubric. That's us. We developed this specifically to go with an intervention that we have been developing. So you can see the items on the left include representation, that there's a restatement of the question, that the answers are correct, and that there's explanations with evidence included, and a summary statement. So I actually want to give y'all just a minute to kind of look at it and think. The rubric on the left by Smith et al., what dimension within the rubric on the right is it really focusing on? So if you look at those items in the Smith et al. Rubric, it's really tapping into one dimension in the Price et al. And I'm going to give you just a minute to think about it. If you want to, you can put what you think in the chat, but you don't have to. But I get that answer in your head and kind of hold it there for a second. All right, and I won't linger on that too terribly long because I want to make sure we kind of get through for our time. Yeah, the rubric on the left for Smith et al. Is really focusing upon organization. So that is the majority of what is it assessing. It's what it is assessing. So if you think about the organization of a math writing response for explanatory here, the first part is representation. Because again, as I said, we're trying to really get people to think about that representation as being an aspect of the math writing. And then when you get into the actual words or text, the very first part should include a restatement of the question so that I can read your answer and I don't necessarily have to have the question right in front of me to figure out what it is you're talking about. So a restatement of the question with answers. So you can either restate the question and then answer it, or answer it within your restatement at the very beginning. And then after that, there is use of evidence to explain your thinking and how you came to your answer, or justification of your answer, and that you end with a summary statement, a brief summary statement. So this is just kind of your classic organization of a response. Restate question, answers, evidence, summary. And then the idea behind this rubric, and we'll kind of show you the intervention in just a second so you can see where this comes from. So you can see a bolded R and then RACES. So that's R racist, and it'll pop up here in a second. But our conceptualization of this rubric by Smith et al. Is that once students master the organizational piece of the writing, we can then actually take this rubric away and pull in the price et al. Rubric, because now they've mastered the organization and it's time to start growing and getting better with what's happening inside the organization. So they've got their organization in place. Now we can start thinking about expanding the use of mathematics vocabulary, or we can start working on building in some of these math writing conventions. And then you can kind of grow from there and keep using that rubric after that point. And again, why do we focus on the organizational piece? Going back to the study that Dr. Smith mentioned earlier by Powell et al., even when teachers do report asking students to write in the mathematics classroom, they rarely report actually teaching students how to write in the mathematics classroom. And when I'm talking about how to write, I mean, it's understanding the question, making a plan, and then composing an organized composition, written piece, right? And we also really focus on the organizational piece because there's a long, long line of self-regulated strategy development and writing that has been used within the writing classroom as well as across content areas. And basically, this research shows that if you provide students and teach them a structure to organize and plan their writing, it is the students actually take it on and they start producing writing that is higher quality, and it also supports their learning across content areas. So once they get that structure in place, they'll start learning science content more deeply, or mathematics. And so we're really focusing here on the intervention you'll see in a moment on promoting the organizational piece and the planning piece so that they can then begin moving into this metacognition and thinking about thinking and using the writing to support them in that. And then a lot of times too, I'm sure you all have encountered a word problem yourself, where you've seen students encounter one where they just get stuck, like they don't even know how to start. But if they have a good foundation in the organization, they can at least get started with that piece. And I'm pausing for 1 second because I see something popping up on the Q&A, but I can't actually see it.
Yeah, so Christopher Nelson is asking for clarification about the Smith et al., so the one tied to races, as a stepping stone for the Price et al. Rubric. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, could you restate the question one time?
Yeah, so I can also answer
Okay.
this. So Christopher Nelson asked, can you go back 2 slides?
Let me see. I'm gonna try.
Wrong way.
There we go. That one.
So this one, yeah. So Christopher is asking about the one on the left as a stepping stone to like build the foundational knowledge in order to use the one on the right from Price et al. And so I would say yes, and I believe you did say this as a way. The rubric on the left is really designed to focus on organization and helping students to organize their mathematical writing while connecting to the representations. And I think this gets back to Suryan's point in the chat earlier about like thinking about good mathematical writing as like a logically flowing. And this is really designed to help students write like clear logical arguments or explanations.
Yep. And I saw something in the chat too about avid ideologies by Erica Thomas. I'm going to say hold on to that one for a minute, and when we have a Q&A session, we can talk about that a little bit more. I'm trying to also kind of keep track of time. So, yeah. And thinking about math writing and math writing instruction, I think when you're talking about the Price et al. Rubric, our goal of math writing instruction is to help students generate clear and coherent mathematical explanations that address all aspects of the prompt with academic language. And then once they've mastered that organizational piece, we really then can move into mathematics writing as instruction. So then we can ask students to compose math writing and then go through the self-evaluation, peer evaluation, revision, and editing process to really get them to begin thinking about their own thinking, thinking about their peers' thinking, and revising their thinking and their understanding. So really kind of getting into that metacognition piece. And this is where we want to go, is math writing as instruction, but we have to start by giving them a foundation from which to begin by focusing on the organization piece. And this is what we have been working on. This is our kind of our mnemonic here. You see runner races, and you can see the nice little visual over here. Thank you, Dr. Bengachia, for doing that one. And we'll talk more about it in just a second, but you can see the first part, runner, is read the problem, underline the question, name a strategy, and then represent the problem. So the first part of our mnemonic here is what we call an attack strategy. This is something to support students in actually reading the word problem, trying to make sense of it, and coming up with a next step or strategy to actually solve the problem. And then the second part, the races, is a strategy to help students think about how to organize their actual writing and then begin composing their writing. So again, you can think about that rubric: restate the question, answer the question, cite evidence, explain, summarize, and then check. Oftentimes we leave off the check piece, but we really want our students to go back and read their own writing and ask, does this make sense? And that's a big step for a lot of students. It's something we gotta focus on. In terms of the actual intervention, we're kind of in the developmental stages. We're hoping to pilot it this year, but it integrates research from math education, writing, special education, and translanguaging to kind of put this whole intervention piece together. I also want to note that there's only 2 or 3 other research teams in the US actually looking at math writing. And so there's not a whole lot of work being done in it. So you've got one of the few teams working on it right here in Vegas. So please reach out to us if you are interested in trying some of this. But our strategy right now, or our intervention right now, is looking at 15 30-minute lessons that kind of goes through the steps you see here, where we model runner races. So we model the whole thing to begin with, and then we teach to mastery the attack strategy. Then we teach to mastery the planning and composition strategy. And then we really focus on using the rubric that you saw earlier to self-evaluate, evaluate peers, and then revise their math writing. And then finally, it's putting it all together. And then after they've mastered that, that's when we bring the price at all rubric in, and then we can start focusing on using math writing with new content to support learning and also building mathematics vocabulary. And so one thing that's important within our intervention is when they first start learning the runner races strategy, we're asking them to apply it to mathematics content that they already know, because we don't want them to have to learn 2 new things at once. We want them to learn the organizational strategy using mathematics they already know. And then once they've mastered the writing strategy, we can then use that writing strategy to help support them in learning new mathematics content. Also, we just have a slide here with attack strategies. So we picked runner races because when we were in classrooms doing observations and talking to teachers, it's just one of the more common ones we saw, especially the races being used. And so we went with runner races. But there are other attack strategies. You can see them represented here. You got cubes, UPS check. I also really like the I need to statements where I've worked with students. You can see an example of a question here where Kadri's made a discovery, claims all squares are rectangles. Do you agree? And so what we would do is ask the student to highlight the questions within the problem and then state I need statements. So I need to decide if all squares are rectangles. I need to decide if I agree with Kadri. I need to explain why I do or do not agree with Kadri. And then this can help structure their written response. And they can also look at their I need to statements to make sure they actually did all the things they said they needed to do. Again, I'm attending the time, so I might start talking a little bit more quickly, but feel free to reach out to us if you have questions kind of on the others. In terms of math writing instruction for multilingual learners, and Dr. Smith, you're welcome to kind of chime in whenever you like?
So I can talk about this slide.
Okay.
So when we think about mathematical writing instruction, so I know that Dr. Smith shared about runner races. That's an intervention designed to support students with their mathematical writing. But maybe you are already doing something in your classroom or you're working with teachers or you're as a team want to be thinking about where you can move forward. So I think we also want to share just like some principles as well. So thinking about incorporating attack strategies to word problem solving if you're not already doing that, like the two Alex just shared. When we are working with multilingual learners, we specifically have a couple of things that we want to draw on. We want students to use the multiple languages when they're making sense of problems and drafting math writing responses. So we, through the work that we do with this intervention with runner races in particular, but in our work with teachers, is just encouraging students to make use of all their language resources when they're writing written responses, particularly as they're developing that language. We also want to teach and encourage students to use cognates or home languages as they develop in their language. And then I'm not sure, some of you may already be familiar with this. There are some existing mathematical language routines specifically designed for multilingual learners from understanding language and scales work. And this is out of Stanford. So this is embedded in some curriculum, not all curriculum. And there are 5 specific language routines specifically designed to support mathematical writing. So thinking about stronger and clearer each time, collecting and displaying, and so on. And if you're interested in these, you can just like Google mathematical language routines and they're going to pop up.
And also, Cameron, Christopher, yes, integrating your mathematics instruction and your ELA instruction or using ELA instruction in co-planning with a mathematics teacher to support these different kinds of writing strategies is awesome. So good work. And we also say like, it's really important that we're allowing time for students to discuss their thinking orally, strategies, and then also to share and discuss their math writing with peers. Oral discourse and language supports, it all supports the development of written language. So without oral language, we don't have reading and writing really. So we have to allow space for oral language to be in place and support students as well as the actual writing piece. We're a little slow, but I think, some parting thoughts here. Really examine the prompts that you're using in your instruction and that are used within the curriculum to make sure that students are engaged in a variety of genres and prompts, that they're writing at least once a week. Take a look at those prompts and make sure there's not language that may be confusing. For example, we were just told blueberries and cranberries mean the same thing in Spanish. And so if you're comparing blueberry muffins to cranberry muffins, that might confuse quite a few students. So looking at the language used within that, use a consistent rubric, give the feedback from the rubric to the students. So that's the most important part with writing is that they get the feedback and then they're actually asked to use the feedback in revising their writing. Teach them how to assess their own math writing. Again, that's a big thing. Check it, read it. Does it make sense? Did I actually answer all the questions? And then teaching them to plan and write in an organized way. We like our runner races, but there are other strategies out there as well. And I will pause here. We're doing okay. You want to take about 5-6 minutes for Q&A, and also please email us if you have questions or comments or anything, and our email addresses are there. I'm not sure if you want to ask questions orally. I think you can raise your hand and we can allow you to talk that way, or you can type questions into the chat. Yeah, and I want to say, thank you to you all showing up.
Thank you.
Reading mathematics. Yeah, no, I like that. I like that idea. And we actually, writing can support reading comprehension. And so by asking students to read prompts and really pick those prompts apart and think about how to organize their writing, it can help them with the comprehension of the problem as well. and different kinds of attack strategies can support the comprehension piece too. Right, well, hopefully everybody has kind of had a chance to write down our email addresses if you need them. I think something popped up in the Q&A.
Surigan asked, I'm curious what impact the implementation of these techniques has had on the sentiment of math in school. Most students dislike them. I think that maybe a question I have or a clarification is that most students dislike math in general, most students like math writing or solving word problems. I think there could be a little bit of both there. I think our hope and our goal is that we can support students with mathematical writing and provide them with strategies to help attack, like the attack strategies for problem solving, so they can develop greater competencies in just solving unfamiliar or novel problems, but also having a strategy of like what they can do in writing a response. I'm also of the mindset that I don't think being assessed on mathematical writing and your ability to write a high quality explanation or justification is going to go away anytime soon. And I really want to support students in that work. One of the things we are doing as a part of piloting our intervention this year is that we are collecting student disposition information, data as well, to see if like gaining skills in this way to help support their mathematical explanations does like move the needle for students who have more negative feelings towards mathematics.
This is the next SIP research-based approaches to school improvement efforts. So you can take a screenshot of this, and then there's a QR code. So I did want to kind of do that plug real quick and make sure everybody kind of knows what we're looking at there. But yeah, we know from SRSD research that it actually improves motivation in content areas and just writing, but we don't know much about mathematics yet. So that's kind of part of the thing that we're trying to do here. I will say in the past, there has been some pushback against SRSD in writing, in that some instructors and some researchers, some teachers have argued that by teaching an organizational strategy like tree or races, get students to produce almost formulaic writing. And the research has a tendency to show, though, is yes, at first, it has a tendency to be pretty formulaic. But once students get familiar with it and internalize the structure, they actually then begin to produce higher quality writing, and they can move away from that more formulaic piece, especially when you're giving them prompts that ask them to do so. Hopefully that made sense.
And we've got one more question in the chat. This is probably our time for the last question. Yasmin asked, mentioned that one interesting way their son's elementary school teacher composed first grade word problems was to customize the questions to their son's interests and hobbies. The son seemed to be more interested when working on those types of math problems. Do you think this is something similar that can be scaled up in a large classroom? And I would say absolutely yes. That is what we advocate in mathematics education, is that curriculum is not a one size fits all, and that you need to adapt the curriculum to fit your context and your students' interests and needs. So I think most definitely this is like, when I think about working with pre-service teachers or with teachers about like what are small ways I can start to like push my practice to be more culturally responsive to my students, this is like an easy one for me, and one that can require just taking a little bit more time to get to know your students, which is like what you should be doing at the beginning anyway, but thinking about how can you leverage those interests to motivate and engage students in mathematics in particular, but in other content areas as well.
Yeah, and we know from reading comprehension research too that the more the reader aligns with or knows about the topic that they're reading about, the better their reading comprehension. So when we're talking about a word problem where the main focus is really seeing their application of mathematics concepts, if it's something that's of interest to them or aligns with their lived experience, their comprehension of the problem is going to be better, which is then going to likely support their application of problem solving strategies. So, and I think once they've shown like good mastery of that, then you can kind of start interspersing some of these word problems that are maybe not so much aligned with interest as kind of practice for generalization.
I think we are out of time. I want to thank
Yep.
all the participants for joining us today, and selecting us to spend an hour with. So thank you very much.
Yep. And hopefully everybody can go get lunch now.